This is Robyn Flans with Robyn Flans Drummer Interviews, and today's interview is brought to you by ePad Drum Practice Pads and Robyn Flans Media. And today is a very special day because we are sitting in a hotel room with Paul Wertico, and he's out in Los Angeles, and we got to come to him to do an interview. I haven't seen Paul in, I don't even want to talk about how long it's been since I've seen Paul. But we all know Paul. He spent nearly 20 years with Pat Metheny, and he's been for quite some time with his group, Wertico, Cain and Gray. He's now on his 6th record, a new record called Afterlife, and he has a new book out, and he's a big-time college professor, and he's got tons to talk about, so we're going to get to it. I'm so excited to see him after all this time. It is so great to be with you, Paul Wertico.
Thanks, Rob. It's great to see you, too.
And it's like we haven't missed a beat.
Right. Well, I think in certain relationships, you can see each other every 20 years, and it feels like you just saw them a half hour ago. Right. Yeah, I think it's been something like that. I know. It's scary.
So, Paul, you have just kept so busy. I don't even know where to start. I guess we should start at the news first, the new stuff, and then we'll go a little bit back, because we haven't sort of stayed in touch, even though a lot of people do know. I mean, you've done other interviews, and obviously people who are your fans know the stuff that's gone on, but I haven't heard it from your mouth, from the horse's mouth. So, okay, let's start first with, I'm really intrigued by the book.
Great.
Okay, I mean, this book, Turn the Beat Around, I just have to ask how you came up with the concept of front beat.
Okay, great. Well, maybe a couple of years ago, Michael Finkelstein from Alfred Music, we were friends, and I had my video, Paul Wertico's Drum Philosophy. So he said, Paul, you should write a book. And I've always wanted to write. I like writing, but I just usually don't have the time. So I decided, okay, what should I write about? I was thinking I could write about my concept. I can write about, different things that would be interesting. And all of a sudden, this thing about front beats, which I came up with the term, actually playing on the 1 and 3. So when
wait, how did you, I mean, what? How did that come into your brain?
It just did. That's how music is too. It's like I'm a big believer in that. What you do, even when you practice, it's like you channel things. You open up channels, and things kind of come through you. So if the more you practice, it's not just that you get more technique all of a sudden, but it's all of a sudden you're able to think differently. It's just expands your antennae, basically. So this just kind of floated in. I have no idea where, because it's the only book of its kind. No one's ever written a book about that. And so I called up Dave Black at Alfred, and I proposed this book. And I was pretty worried at first, because I said, Dave, please don't tell anybody about this. Because I was thinking, if you tell a friend, or they tell a friend, all of a sudden someone goes, that's a great idea. And the next thing it's an article in some drum magazine. So when I proposed it, I basically didn't do anything for a year. And then Dave called me up, and he said, well, we're doing our budget. Will you be able to do it this year? And I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. So I started writing out things in tab at first. because my finale wasn't really working and all that. So I wrote out like thousands of things in tab, and I called Dave and he goes, well, we really need it in finale.
Oh,
so then
great.
I wrote it in finale, and the stems I had going down with the bass drum, which, because they wouldn't line up for whatever reason going up. So then like they accepted that, but then a guy named Matt Humphreys that works at Alfred had to redo all my stuff. And then I had to, like, because there's over 1,000 exercises, I had to kind of proofread everything. But they were great to work with. And the whole thing, even the idea, turn the beat around. I mean, that's a song, but it really wasn't about that. It was about, like, why does everybody play on 2 and 4? I mean, out of all the thousands of songs, that, you know, so I thought, okay, Sunshine Your Love, which is, you know, Ginger Baker with Cream, that's on the 1 and 3. And I knew there was some research about that, because that was a pretty big deal. It was one of the few times that ever happened.
Yeah.
And so in Ginger's movie, Beware Mr. Baker, he talks that, you know, Jack Bruce brought it in and it was like too fast, and he decided to play it on 1 and 3, where Tom Dowd, the engineer, in his DVD, The Language of Music, said that when they were recording Disraeli Gears, every song was going great except for that one. And then he just said, you guys ever seen American Western? I mean, just try that. And when they did it, it all came together. So that's the really famous one. But then there was a couple others that I knew, Dazed and Confused by Led Zeppelin. The second chorus of that, John Bonham plays on the 1 and 3. Everybody I played it for never even noticed that.
That's interesting.
It was really interesting because it's a real subtle thing. And then there's a band called If with a great drummer, Dennis Elliott, that went on to play with Foreigner.
Oh, right.
And so there was a tune called Forgotten Roads that he did it. And then there's a couple others. There's Jim Gordon played on Derek and the Dominoes' Bell Bottom Blues. And then Danny Serafin played on Woman Don't Want to Love Me from Chicago 7. But those were kind of the only ones. And even all of those, except for maybe Sunshine Your Love, they actually go back and play 2 and 4, you know, so they kind of, it's almost like a release. And then, you know, reggae had a backwards kind of thing, and then Tony Allen, the great Afrobeat drummer, had some stuff that played on the 1-3. But I'm thinking, there's thousands of books, and they're always about playing 2 and 4. And I thought, okay, it's not just that I'm going to change the world and everything's going to go to 1 and 3, but it could. And in some ways, I'm thinking, that's why I came up with the idea of front beats, thinking, well, you could take tunes, and we're always looking for something new. Why not play it on the 1 and 3? And then a band leader could say, yeah, instead of backbeats on this, play front beats. So everyone would know what that meant, hopefully.
So it's just a way of expanding your vocabulary.
Yes, but it turned out to be much more than that, because once it was published, because I didn't even want to use it with my students, because I was very careful about this. Once I started using the book with my students, not only was it really challenging in a good way. I mean, I had one student that's really, he said it's the only book that's really kicked him, you know. But their playing, when they went back to 2 and 4, got so much better. All of a sudden, their awareness of the 1 and 3 became fatter and more like just wider and just better. So that's the thing too. So you could use this book technically because it goes from the simplest beats to like really almost impossible coordination, independence and endurance exercises. Plus you can mix and match forever because it's like sort of an open-ended book. But also whether you use it for coming up with new beats or it just expands your hearing and then your concept, and when you go back to playing the regular way, it's also improved your time. So that's how this came. And I mean, it just kind of came out of the sky for me.
Interesting.
It was totally natural.
Okay.
And I think, no, that's good though, because, you know, I think that's what you want is things that aren't contrived or, you know, I think, you know, even when you play, you know, you don't want to play stuff to impress somebody or whatever. You just want to play the truth as you see it. And that's sort of what I did, hopefully.
Okay, so the truth as you see it. So that brings me to the next project.
Okay.
After Live. The truth as we see it.
Okay.
Totally improvised. That's just mind-blowing to me, to go on stage and be that naked. I mean, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We don't talk about anything. There's nothing. We don't talk about, the key the song's going to be in or the groove. We just start playing. And see, I've been doing this my entire life, though, since like back in the 70s and 80s. There was two bands. I had a band called Earwax Control.
Yeah, I remember.
And we were
Talking
100% improvised. Spontaneous Composition, which was a trio, that was totally improvised. And then there's a lot of records I've made since then. There's a great sax player, Frank Catalano. We did a total improvisational duo, sax and drums. So doing this it's so fun because okay, so when you think about life, okay, the present, most people live in the past or the future. They really sometimes aren't living in the present. And when you improvise completely, you are living completely in the present because you're channeling things. You might be looking forward to where it might go, but you don't know where it's going to go because you don't know what the other people are going to do. It's not like there's a plot. There's no plan. So you have to be in the present, and you're always working together to kind of move forward. And that, to me, my students at school at Roosevelt University, I teach them how to do that because I think it's like a muscle that you want to develop. Mm-hmm. And when you're young, that's the time to really develop that muscle. Because the older you get, sometimes it gets hard because you've been so programmed to think certain ways.
So let's go back in time and what got you to learn about improvisation from the get-go, and how do you actually teach that?
Great question. As far as how I got into it, it seemed like I've always been into it. I don't know why.
So how did you learn it?
I didn't learn it. I just did it. Yeah. I remember even in high school, there was a sax player in my high school band, and he and I would just get together and just start playing, sax and drums. And I remember one time we were playing and we had the lights out and his mom walked in the door, and I remember like jumping up because I was so into this whole thing.
The moment.
And I always liked music. I mean, I guess even as a kid I would buy these records that, like from Europe and stuff, free jazz, avant-garde jazz. I kind of liked the sound of just things that weren't predictable. And as far as how you teach it, it's kind of allowing the students to actually take chances, not to be afraid to fail,
right.
and kind of get in touch with themselves. And the thing that's beautiful about it is that you get better as you do it, but it's a mirror to you because, there's nothing to fall back on. So if you run out of ideas, that means that you've run out of ideas for yourself. But if you listen to other people, then you're being fed ideas constantly by who you're playing with. So that's infinite.
Interesting.
So that's the way you kind of look at it. So that's what I'm talking about, living in the present and keeping an ear open, keeping your senses open. So that's what's beautiful about it. So two people, like for instance, if I always talk to you and then I talk to someone else, and I always spiel the same stuff, that would be really boring after a while, even if I was good at it. But then if I listen to what that person says, then I have to somehow come up with something new to be able to react to that.
Right.
And that's basically what it is. It's like having a conversation, except you're doing it musically.
Right.
And,
right.
You can have a conversation on very, like if you're talking to a little kid, you're not going to use big words, or if you're talking to like somebody that's an artist or a poet, you're going to channel different languages, you're going to channel different ways of expressing yourself. You do that musically too.
But when you improvise, you have to have a large vocabulary. So where did you get that vocabulary? Where did you learn the vocabulary as a kid? Because now you're talking about, you just gave me an example of being in high school, but where did you learn the vocabulary to improvise?
I don't know where. I mean, I think I had a lot of records, and I listened to jazz records, rock records, ethnic music, just bought anything, Tibetan monks, all that. And I would just somehow play along with those records possibly. And then just when you play with great musicians or great records, all of a sudden, it's like through osmosis, you kind of get greatness put into you, I hope. And then after a while, you just kind of let go. And I was talking earlier about channeling, that, when we, through osmosis and through practice and stuff, you're able to open up your antennas, your radars, to things that are already out there. And I think I just did that. And I was lucky because I actually started late. My parents and I moved to Cary, Illinois when I was 12. And I wasn't in a band at that time. I wasn't playing music. I always loved music. And my mom was like, just take up an instrument, just don't take up the drums. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So I joined the school band. I had a great school band director who's a sax player named Vern Pade. And he taught me how to read music and hold the sticks. And then I sat down at a friend's drum set. And this kid had been playing since he was 8, and all of a sudden I could play the kit. And he was like, "How are you doing that?" And I said, "I don't know." So I became like the soloist in the band and all that. And then when I was going into high school, I wasn't even going to stay in the band. I was, I got a drum set for graduation from my grandmother, which was really nice. And I would sit there and I'd play. I remember the AM radio in the back of my head, and I'd be playing along with like Holly's songs and stuff, but playing free, like playing completely just like as if I'm talking, and like waves instead of just keeping the beat all the time. So then when I went into high school, I wanted to be a chemist. I was into sports. And my high school band director, who I dedicated the book to, Mr. Donald Ahrensberger, he was like, "Well, you should audition for the band." And I remember when I auditioned, I didn't even look at the material or anything. And I think I came in 8th. And the concert band only had like 5 chairs. He expanded it to 8. And so then all of a sudden I'm in this thing, and all of a sudden I became like the head of the percussion section. It just kind of happened, and he would let me improvise on symphonies, saying, "Yeah, I'd like what you're doing more." So I was lucky to have teachers that inspired that creativity. I always had technique. It was weird. I could always play fast. I grew up playing on pillows, and I just all of a sudden, when I got in a kit, I could play effortlessly. It was just magic. Because one time I asked my mom, "Can I take some drum set lessons?" And she just no, just keep doing what you want to do. And as it turned out, that would have been better, because I think at that time I remember that there was a drum instructor, and he was okay, but I think it probably wouldn't have been good for me. So I just kept on playing and experimenting and listening to a lot of music. I have really good pitch, and music makes sense to me. And so I was really form-oriented and also melodic-oriented. So, I actually like melodies. In fact, like in high school, I was the head of the band, was head marching band. I decided to play bass and cymbals rather than snare drum so I could accent the march, the melodies and stuff.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I came up with free cadences, for the kids. I don't know where all this stuff came from, because no one else in my family is musical. I mean, it's not like I come from a family of musicians.
It's funny.
And so sometimes it makes you think about, like, where does this stuff kind of come from?
Aliens!
How we're wired for whatever.
Yeah.
But also the luck of having the people support you and all that.
Yeah.
So that's
and
probably what
the
happened.
desire.
Yeah, the desire. I mean, I used to practice. I saw my old girlfriend. Wertico, Cain and Gray was doing a gig at U of I. It was a thing called, Pygmalion Fest a couple months ago. So I went there, and I had a brilliant girlfriend throughout high school and college too. She was a 4.0 student. And she was telling me how crazy I was back then. She was going, we'd be driving, and all of a sudden you'd get a rhythm in your head, and you'd say, "Okay, pull over, I gotta go." And I don't remember this stuff. And I remember even when I was even after college, I had like a little house on the corner, and I'd play these gigs, get home at like maybe 2 a.m. I'd put on the headphones, windows open, just wailing. And I remember one time my next door neighbor came over.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did the neighbors?
Well, yeah, the next door neighbor came over, and he says, "Man, didn't you hear me knocking on your door at 4:30 in the morning?"
Oh, no.
And I said, "No." He said, "Good, I was going to kill you." But I had no sense of anything other than I used to practice, 8-12 hours a day. And, it was amazing to do that. And I guess that's just what happened. And it seems like you had more time back then. You didn't have all these distractions always taken away from.
Right. Well, technology was different too.
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
But that's what I did, And
so I'm interested, because you mentioned I caught you saying, the Hollies and this and that, and we had a conversation a little earlier off camera, and I'm curious, and yet you do this improvisational music that's so, you could call it out sometimes. Yeah. It goes out. Well, yeah. And it's really interesting, and yet, we had this conversation about jazz sometimes being elitist. And I'm fascinated by your very open mind, and that you're not one of those people. And you enlightened me to the fact that after you left Pat Metheny, you were with him almost 20 years, right. You played in a rock group.
Yeah.
So I find that really interesting, because jazz sometimes is a fairly kind of, I'm sorry, everybody. I don't mean to, and if you're not one of those, I apologize. But sometimes it can be this interesting, so how do you think that you were able to sort of bypass that thing?
Well, I think a lot of the younger, and even people my age, they're not as elitist, because it was a threat to jazz musicians, older jazz musicians, like the British invasion coming in. All of a sudden, you had, because jazz was popular, for a while.
Now, see, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You see, when you're younger, you tend, as you're immersing yourself in the jazz, you tend to be more elitist.
It depends on who you are, though, really.
Because actually, interestingly enough, when my son was studying jazz and in his earlier days, he was, it's all about the jazz. It's the jazz. It's the jazz. And then as he got really about the music, he realized it's not just about the jazz. Right. And, music is music, and it's good to know it all, and become an all-around player is really, what he felt was the right thing. But I think when you're first immersed in that jazz, it's the jazz.
I don't know. It really depends. Because there's some schools, for instance, that, teach bebop and big band pretty exclusively. And then, like, for instance, I was the head of the jazz department at Roosevelt for 5 years. Now I'm just teaching, but I changed it to jazz and contemporary music studies. So instead of having beginner to advanced combos, we have genre-specific combos. So we have a swing combo. We have a bebop combo, a hard bop combo. We have an avant-garde combo. We have a Brazilian combo. We have even sometimes a Stevie Wonder combo. We have, because I think, we try to open up that it's just music. It really is. It's just music. And, there's cultural things. There's a lot of stuff that sometimes when people could be elitist, maybe sometimes there's cultural things or things that where they feel like their music has gotten ripped off, or there's many factors for that. But most of the musicians that I know now, and even Larry Coryell, who he just died unfortunately this year. He was 10 years older than me, but he was saying that he grew up with Miles Davis and Coltrane, but the Beatles too. So now I think we can listen to a lot more music and just put it together. And when fusion happened, that's all of a sudden now like the world kind of came in. So all of a sudden, Brazilian music, African music, Bulgarian music, all that stuff just started filtering into jazz. Because, jazz was funny. It started out in brothels, basically, and I mean, it was, the early jazz, and then it became popular for, Dixieland stuff was, like the Roaring 20s, and they got to be really popular as swing in the 30s and early 40s. But then bebop came as a kind of reaction to, playing dance music, sort of. And then they lost the audience. So then hard bop came in, and so you had great musicians, but they went back to blues and gospel kind of roots with bebop technique. And then as things start breaking down, all of a sudden R&B starts happening. All these different things start branching off. Avant-garde comes in with like, well, now we're breaking down the rules. Let's just break down all the rules, which kind of killed some of the audience, but it also allowed complete freedom, But even avant-garde music, it's funny, sometimes there was a drummer that just died recently. I forgot what band he was in, but he was from England, and he was saying that he was one of the first avant-garde drummers in Britain, but there were so many rules in avant-garde that it was
not avant-garde.
Yeah, right. It was not. Yeah, And so rock, when it was growing, was freer than even the free music.
Right.
So it just depends on what scene you're in, who you're playing with. And I've always been around really open-minded musicians, people that really just, it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's good, and that's really true. And, I you wouldn't believe the crazy stuff I've done. I mean, there was a sax player, Joe Daly, who was this fantastic sax player that I started playing with when I got out of school. And I turned out Pat Metheny's gig to play with Joe at one time. Pat had come into Chicago, and his drummer could make it, and he asked me to do like a week. And by that time, I'd been playing with Joe for 2 years, and we had like a big gig. So I stayed with Joe. But Joe, we had like, he was a sax player, great educator too. But I remember one time we were playing this concert, and we were trading fours. Now, I happened to put a cassette, and I happened to tape, there was a commercial, I think it was like a toilet paper commercial, went ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-do-ba-do-da, uh-oh. And so for one of my trading fours, I hit that button, and he loved that. Whole audience just fell out of their chairs. Like, how would anybody do that? So I've always done stuff like, I don't care. I'm just going to do what I want. It's out of respect for the music. It's not out of disrespect for the music either. Right. And so to get back to your thing about playing rock, I've always loved rock too. And when I was all of a sudden, I joined this Polish rock band, and how that happened was the president of the Pat Metheny fan club in Poland loved this band. Their drummer had left, and they said, "You want to play a gig with them?" I said, "Sure." So I played a gig, which turned out to be our first record, and then they said, "You want to join our band?" I was like, "Sure." So I just go with the flow. I really think that life is really making decisions and just riding the wave of what you can do, and that's what improvisation is too.
There we are.
Together, there we go.
Oh my God!
And life is one big improvisation. I mean, really, we're making it up as we go along every second. So why should it be any different with music?
So I just want to say that it's amazing to be with you. I want to tell you to be healthy. I do want to just mention that you had a health scare this year.
Yeah.
You might want to tell people and give a little bit of healthy advice to our viewers as we wrap things up.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've always been healthy, and, as an artist and as an educator, you write a drum book to help people out, and you do recordings to inspire people. So earlier this year, all of a sudden, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And I had no symptoms, no family history. It was just this thing on a blood test called PSA that kept on going up over the last couple of years. And so they finally found something. And I went to a great doctor, and they did a robotic kind of surgery. And by the time I got out of the operating table and got to the hospital room, they said, well, try to get some rest and try to walk tomorrow if you can. I said, I can walk now. So no one could kind of believe that I was I took no painkillers afterwards, nothing. And I was fine. And the thing with prostate cancer, a lot of people keep it private because there's a sort of after effect, continence in ED, there's kind of these issues that can happen, but I'm not suffering from any of that stuff. And the reason I'm telling you this is because, like I said, with this, you want to make the world a better place. Well, I really just want to let people know that, after 45, all men should get a PSA
Yeah,
test. Because
absolutely.
1 in 7 men get prostate cancer, 1 in 5 African American people, men get it. And I talked to a couple people after I had the operation, and they didn't know what a PSA was. They thought, well, it's public service announcements.
God.
And I went, okay, this is my bully pulpit to make
Yeah,
something again out
absolutely.
of nothing. Because it's like improvisation. You make something out of nothing.
Absolutely.
Well, with health issues, if you're dead, it's going to be hard to improvise.
Yeah.
So since I'm fine, I want to let people know that don't be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
save your life.
Yeah, and because cancer is treatable if you catch it in the beginning, and that's the most important thing about cancer.
That's right.
So I really appreciate that you were able to share that.
Oh, it's
and
my pleasure. If I can save one life out there,
Yeah.
then it's all worth it.
absolutely, and I'm so glad that you're healthy to be here today,
Me too.
and that after all this time we got to talk. And oh my God, it's so
Likewise.
good to see you, Paul.
Thank
and thank you for sharing all these wonderful things and after live and so much amazing music on this. So everybody, please, and the prior CDs,
Yeah.
just great music, great human. Thank you so much for being with us, and stay tuned for what's next.
We're lucky to have Robyn. I'm
Aw,
telling you.
thanks, Paul. Thanks.